Good to see everybody. So this is our third and final week of winning in marriage, and I want to personally thank Linda for doing the last 2 weeks. She did an awesome job, didn't she? Brought a lot of good stuff for us. Appreciate that. Was trying to think of a simple way to say thank you to Linda, and came up with this great idea. How many of you remember? Anybody come to comedy night a few weeks ago? Michael Jr. You remember how we had a little technical glitch with rescheduling that from a little bit before there? So my brother-in-law was in Indianapolis, and his company brought in Michael Jr. To their business about a week and a half ago. So I asked him to pick up a DVD for you, but I asked him to share the story with Michael of what happened here. So Michael wrote on this and said, "Linda, this is what a DVD looks like." So, Greg, would you go? She's holding the baby there. Can you go ahead and give that to Linda? So, Linda, you enjoy that, and thank you for the last few weeks here. So, good stuff, though. Good stuff in this series. You know, in week one, Linda was talking to us about how we need to strive to be great teammates in marriage, and how we are entering into a contract, how we are not entering into a contract, but we are actually entering into a covenant. Last week, she talked about loving each other, not based on our performance, but because of the value that we each hold, and how we are called to imitate Christ, who came to serve, and that's what we're supposed to be about in our marriages. It's not about power, it's about serving one another. And the reality that as we grow closer to God, we also grow closer to one another. Now, we could spend months covering all the topics relating to marriage. Am I right? But today, I want to focus in this last week on two areas. I want us to be reminded of the importance of having fun together, and I want us to know how when we aren't having fun together and we're in a tough spot, that we understand how to fight fair. Now, let's start with the importance of having fun together. King Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament to share some of his wisdom in his older years about how couples should look at their marriage. And in chapter 9, verse 9, he addresses the men and he says, "Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love." Now, I want you to stop, and I want you to just to take a moment right now to think about your marriage. Where your marriage is right now. Would you use the word enjoyable to describe it? For many of you, you might use the word stressful, distant, complacent, businesslike, painful, or maybe even stranger to describe your marriage. But the word enjoyable doesn't make your top 10 list of where you are right now. Something has changed through the years for you. And too often there are couples that have a lot of fun when they're dating, but then they get married and life happens over a long period of time, and they just stop enjoying each other. And one of the dangers is that without fun, without adventure, without romance, without physical intimacy, marriage is often reduced to simply a business relationship. It's like a business partnership. It's like two roommates who are living under the same roof, but living entirely different lives. The communication simply becomes about business. You do this, I'll do this. You cover that, I'll cover this. Your marriage did not start that way. You didn't fall in love with your spouse to have a business relationship. How often do you hear a person that falls in love with someone that they're totally bored with? Have you ever heard a young girl say, "Oh, this guy is awesome. I mean, when we get together, we have nothing in common." Right? All we do is sit there and say nothing to each other. And occasionally I watch him play his video games. He's just so dull and so boring. It's such a turn on. I think he's really the one for me. Right? How often do you hear that? What you hear is what? "Oh my gosh, we have so much in common. It's so much fun when we get together." And it's fun during the dating period, or you wouldn't get married. But then you get married, and some people lose all of the adventure, and you lose all of the fun. But having fun together, it was critical to bringing you together, and it's critical to keeping you together. Fun cannot be seen as a luxury in your marriage. You can't say, but we don't have time for fun, because I would say you don't have time not to have fun. Because if you don't have some fun in your marriage, one day, pretty likely that you're not going to have a marriage. You know, about 5 years ago, I came across this article from Pastor Craig Groeschel that talks about 3 types of fun that every couple must have. The first type of fun that every winning married couple must enjoy is face-to-face fun. This is where we get together, where we enjoy each other's company face-to-face, because often in dating, couples can talk and talk for hours on end. Do you remember that? Remember when you're first dating and how you could talk for hours and hours? And then when you're not together, what? You move on to texting for hours and hours. And later on, you get on the phone and you talk some more, right? And if someone isn't talking, you're perfectly content to just sit there quietly and hear the other person breathing, right? Right? But then you get married, and over time, all of this face-to-face time ends up being business time. Who's going to get the kids? And you've got to get him to soccer, and you've got to get her to dance, and we've got to get the oil changed on the car, and we're out of milk again, and the bills need paid, and the air conditioner needs fixed, and on and on and on. We become business partners, and we lose the meaningful face-to-face time that is so important to keeping the energy and the passion alive in our relationship. And if you don't have some type of date night regularly scheduled in your marriage, you've got to change your calendar, and you need to do that soon. You need an intentional time away from the kids, away from the chores that need done at the house, away from the business side of marriage, so that you can connect face to face and be reminded of what it was about each other that drew you together in the first place. You need to love each other with your words and share what's going on in your lives at a deeper, more meaningful level. And Rachel and I, we have the same struggle. We have busy schedules. We both work. We got 3 beautiful girls that keep us on our toes all the time. It's easy to get into survival mode, isn't it? And you got to have date nights. You have to have a chance to get together to catch up. And here's a good gauge. Next time you go out on your date night, do this. Take a couple topics off the table. All right? If you have kids, no conversation about your kids. No conversation about work. You figure out what it is that typically consumes your time and your focus. You take those topics off the table. Those are not allowed to be talked about during our date night, and see what's left. Now, some of you are going to get to a place where you might have to listen to each other breathing for a little bit there, all right? But that's just going to point out to you where things are in your marriage. Why it's so important for you to be doing these date nights is because you've become so consumed with the kids or your jobs or this or that you have forgotten how to simply be together face to face and talk and share at a deep level with each other about what's really going on in your lives. You have to make face-to-face time a priority. The second type of fun he talks about that you need to have fun with your spouse is side-to-side fun. Now, this is where you're hanging out with your best friend. You're doing something that you enjoy with your wife or your husband. It's enjoying time doing common activities. Now, just as women typically crave the face-to-face time more, men generally crave more of the side-to-side time. Hanging out, doing something that they enjoy with their wife for some reason. It just makes a man feel valued. It's fun, and he sees you as his best friend, and it's an incredibly bonding experience for both, especially for the men. I like what one guy said. He said this, I always like to be by my wife's side, and I always hold her hand. And he said, I do it for 2 reasons. 1, because I love her, and 2, because if I let go, she'll go shopping. So I always hold on to her hands. Right? But what can you do together side by side that's fun? Maybe you like playing board games together, or going mountain climbing, or taking long walks, or sitting out in the morning and drinking tea and listening to the birds, or whatever it is. The side by side time is important for your marriage. You ladies enter into his world. Men, you enter into her world and do what she enjoys. But I'm telling you, ladies, you can get your man talking for hours if you join him in a hobby that he loves. There's something in guys that opens up for conversation when they're active and they're doing something that they love with you by their side. 3 types of fun: face-to-face, side by side. Now, I shared this list like 4 or 5 years ago, but I know some of you still remember the last one. What's the last one? Belly button to belly button fun. All right? Oh, he did not just say that. Oh, yes, he did. Okay? You're going to remember that one. Now, let me give you some advice about this, because I believe that one of the best things that you can do for your marriage is to have some physical and intimate fun. So let me give some advice to the men and then to the women. Guys, you need to work on your approach to the whole area of physical intimacy with your wife. All right? I'm just talking real here today, guys. All right? You can't just show up naked and think that she's going to be interested. All right? Guys are microwaves. Women are crock pots. All right? They need a little bit. They're not ready at a moment's notice. All right? They want to be warmed up first. A woman's strongest sexual organ is her brain. All right? For them, it's a package deal. They don't typically just want the physical intimacy. They want the conversation. They want the romance. They want the foot rubs. They want the thoughtful gifts. They want a listening ear. So you men need to meet those intimate needs for her if you want her to desire to meet your physical needs. So work on your approach. Ladies, my advice for you: make an approach. Any approach. For all things that are confusing about guys, this is not a difficult one, all right? If you walk into a room and say, "You want some of this?" you've succeeded, okay? You're good, all right? Guys are visual. Have some fun with that, all right? Stop wearing flannel at night, all right? Get some lingerie, go on a date, play some music, draw a bath, give a back rub, put on some Marvin Gaye and say, "Let's get it on." You know, if you're married, it's okay to do that. It is honoring to your marriage, and it is honoring to God to do that. Now, here's the thing. Let me try to get serious for a minute. Ladies, generally speaking, we all agree, not always, I understand that, but generally speaking, most men desire physical intimacy more often than women. Agreed? Okay? So you need to understand that physical intimacy in marriage is so important to a man. When you turn off the faucet and things go dry, this is a crisis for the man. It's the equivalent of the emotional distress that you would face if there was silence and no emotional intimacy. That would be a crisis for you. And one of the greatest ways that you can love each other is by coming together and renewing your covenant. And sex is spiritual above anything else. It's the picture of two becoming one and ministering to one another. It's a blessing from God, and it's a way that you serve one another. So, ladies, what you need to realize is that if he is not getting his sexual needs met, listen to me on this, he has no other legitimate option but you. Everything else is sinful. You are his only legitimate outlet for sexual fulfillment. And one of the greatest things that you can do for each other is to engage in frequent and creative and spiritual lovemaking. It is a gift. It is honoring to God, and it renews the covenant that you have made to one another. Because in the world we live in, with the ease of access to pornography, the increased number of affairs, you have to figure out how to better meet your spouse's needs, whether it's the physical, emotional, relational, or spiritual part of that relationship. You have to fight for your marriage. And the one way that you do that is by taking care of each other's greatest needs, whatever those greatest needs happen to be for one another. Let your love be so consuming towards your spouse that they absolutely have no desire to look anywhere else for a replacement. Not that going through a rough patch in your marriage justifies anybody doing something out of that marriage boundary. But if there are things that you can be doing to help your spouse not even have to worry about being tempted by those outside things, why wouldn't you do those for one another? So step it up and have some more fun together in your marriage. Make all three of those types of fun a bigger priority in your marriage. Now, we know that there are times in marriage when having fun is not a priority, right? Sometimes things get so tough, feelings get so hurt, that having fun together is not something that's even on the radar. Sometimes we just get consumed with being upset with one another, don't we? The reality is all couples or good friends are going to fight. Why? Because we are sinners, and our self-absorbed nature leads us to do things that aren't honoring to God. All couples will fight, but here's what we need to understand. Healthy couples fight fair, and they fight for a win-win situation. Unhealthy couples fight dirty, below the belt, jabs, undercuts, accusations. So since we know that fights are going to happen, we need to remind ourselves of the desired outcome of those fights. Because what you're hoping to get out of the fight is critical to what type of person you're going to be in the fight. Now, here's the key thought I want you to have in your head as we talk about this area more. Healthy couples fight for resolution. Unhealthy couples fight for victory. Unhealthy couples, it's all about, I'm going to one-up you. My biggest concern going into this is I'm going to get the final word in. I am going to verbally destroy the other person. The goal is victory. In this approach, somebody has to lose so that the other one can win. And let me just tell you, if that's where you're at, that is the sign of an immature marriage. Healthy couples know that even though they're upset in the moment, their hearts, their desire is to become stronger as a result of going through this struggle. The goal is resolution. And in this approach, both seek to win so that nobody loses. You know, there's an interesting study done by Dr. John Gottman, who's a marriage specialist. And for 16 years, he studied couples that fight. And he watched them, and he studied how they interacted with each other. And he got to the point where he could watch a couple argue for just 5 minutes. And he could determine with 91% accuracy whether that couple would make it or if they would end up divorced. What would happen if somebody watched you two argue for 5 minutes? 91% accuracy on whether or not. Because he says it's all about how you fight. It's not if you fight, it's how you fight. So whether it's with your spouse, your fiance, a good friend, we want to seek God so that we can understand win-win fighting. Two of the best verses on this subject are found in James 1, verses 19 and 20. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, the author of these verses, James, was the brother of Jesus. And the reason I absolutely love the book of James is because it offers such great advice for day-to-day living. And what I want to do is I want to break down these two verses. I want to give you 3 rules for win-win fighting. Because the reality is, these 3 rules, they are not earth-shattering new ways of thinking about how to resolve a conflict. When we hear them, they sound extremely obvious, but the reality is the majority of us in here are not very good at using these 3 rules when the heat rises and the tempers flare in our marriages and in our friendships. So let's look at the first one. The first key to getting to a win-win situation in fighting is to stop to listen carefully. How many of you would consider yourselves to be an excellent listener? Some of you were thinking about putting your hands up, but you realized your spouse was sitting next to you. And you're like, no, never mind. When we are in a fight and things are escalating and tempers are going, we have to stop to listen carefully, because so often we don't in that moment, do we? The first instruction we get in James 1:19 is what again? Everyone should be what? Quick to listen. Everyone should be quick to listen. Now, some of you, we could stop right there. And you could battle with that for the next couple of weeks, just trying to get that part right, couldn't you? Because you know. How many of you just straight up? I'm not that. When my temper's going in that, I am not quick to listen. How many of you would just say, yep, that's me, Chris. That's just where I'm at right now, right? That's hard to do. When the tempers are there, when the emotions are running hot, and we're ready to just blast them, it's hard to just go, be quick to listen. We're quick to speak. We're quick to argue back. We're quick to make a point. We're quick to throw in a low blow. We're quick to speak. And instead of that, we need to be quick to listen. When we start to fight, we stop and we really need to focus and we really, really hear what the other person is saying. Proverbs 18:2 says it this way: fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Ouch. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but they delight in airing their own opinions. So you just remember that next time when you're not quick to listen. God says you are being a fool right now. A fool is like, hey, I don't really care what you're saying, but I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking. And that's what we do in fights, isn't it? We're not trying to understand the other person. Instead of really listening, we're already working on our comeback, aren't we? We're already working on our defense because we just want to be heard. We just want to make our point. We just want to win. And Scripture says that we are foolish when we do that, when we are not working towards a win-win resolution. So here's a simple strategy that you can use to help you if this is happening in your relationship. Again, nothing you probably haven't heard of, but I'm guessing most of us don't actually use this. The next time you're in an argument, make yourself repeat back to your spouse what your spouse just said. I told you, nothing profound there, is it? But how many of us actually ever do that? And what it does is it forces us to listen, and then it validates our spouse to know that he or she has actually been heard. So after your spouse speaks to you, say, so what you're saying is, and then you repeat it back to them. And what that does is it keeps you both focused on the issue rather than allowing the disagreement to escalate. And instead of starting to fight about how we're fighting, we're actually able to fight for resolution about the issue that's at the heart of the matter. And then after you repeat back to them what they said, you validate their feelings. I understand why you feel this way when I do whatever. You don't have to agree with the issue. You can still validate their feelings. So what you're saying is, when I did this, that it made you feel neglected or undervalued. And suddenly what you're doing is you're really keeping it on the issue rather than doing what we so often do when we fight about what we just said and letting the issue get buried somewhere in our inappropriate behavior towards one another. So stop and listen carefully to what the other person is saying. Let's go back to our 2 verses for win-win fighting. Rule number 2. Everyone should be quick to listen. What's the next part? Slow to speak. The second rule for win-win fighting is to guard your words faithfully. Guard your words faithfully. How many of you would say that you have excellent control in guarding the words that come out of your mouths? You only say exactly what needs to be said and nothing more. Most of us have a lot of work to do in that area, don't we? All right? Our theme verse tells us that we need to guard our words faithfully. Everybody should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Listen to the wisdom we find, Proverbs 21:23. Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. And I really like how the New Living Translation version says the same verse. It says this: watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble. Okay? Great verse. Don't use it in the argument, okay? Keep your mouth shut. No, that's not going to go well. That's not going to end well for you, all right? Watch your mouth. This is for you, not for your spouse. Watch your mouth. Keep your mouth shut. When you're in a fight, you need to do a whole lot more listening than you do talking. And the key to a win-win fight is to keep it focused on the issue at hand. When we escalate with our words and when we escalate with our emotions, we lose sight of the main goal, which, as we said earlier, is to solve the issue, not to have a victory. So one of the things that you need to do as a couple when you aren't fighting is to establish some ground rules for when you do fight. You need to establish these rules when level heads prevail. Set them up ahead of time so you'll need them when the situation calls for it. Let me just give you some examples of some basic ground rules you might want to consider using. Never call names, all right? We're going to be adults here. We're not calling names. Never raise your voice. Take a moment, count to 10 if you need to, before you respond. Don't need to even be raising our voices in this. Don't get historical. Back in 1984, you did this. All right? Don't go there. We're not playing scorecards. Don't get historical. Don't use the words never or always. You never do that, or you always do that. It's one of the fastest ways to shut down a conversation and pretty much never truth. Don't use the words never or always. Never threaten divorce. Don't do it. That's a low blow. That's uncalled for. Remember, we believe that marriage is meant for a lifetime. We are never going to resort to that kind of below-the-belt threat. There's nothing good that will come from that. Never threaten divorce. Stop to listen carefully. Guard your words faithfully. And then finally, the third rule for win-win fighting is handle your anger righteously. Handle your anger righteously. If we want to win in marriage, then we need to learn to handle our anger righteously. This is so important because we will get angry and we want to handle it in a way that honors God. James 1:19 says this, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. What's next? Slow to become angry. Why? Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Listen, there are some things that you've just got to learn to let go of. If you want to have a great marriage, there are some things that you just have to say, you know what? This isn't worth it. It's not worth holding on to this anger or this resentment any longer. Look at the words of Ephesians 4, starting in verse 26. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but you can get angry, and being angry in itself is not necessarily a sin. It's what you do with the anger that determines whether it becomes sin. We're supposed to have a righteous anger. When we work with Kids Alive, when we work with Destiny Rescue, we see kids that are in sex trafficking and stuff like that. That should make us furious. That is a righteous anger, and that is a God-honoring thing to have. Jesus went into the temples one time, and they turned this place of worship into like this vending place. All these people set up selling stuff and everything. He started flipping tables, right? Righteous anger. Righteous anger is okay. But most of the time, our anger is not righteous. It's self-serving. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. Now, this can be one of the life-changing principles for your marriage. Literally, don't let the sun go down when you're angry. Don't go to bed mad. Don't go to bed with unresolved issues. Why? Because it gives your spiritual enemy a foothold. You have to fight for your marriage. The enemy is always at work. The enemy wants to destroy your marriage. The enemy is always looking for a little crack where he can just come right in there and try to tear down your marriage. He is always looking for the smallest opening. And here's what I want you to think about. Anytime you go to bed with an unresolved issue, what you did is you gave the enemy a foothold in your marriage. Anytime you didn't work it out, anytime that you didn't forgive, anytime that you didn't talk about it, you go to bed and guess what happens the next day? You wake up and the problem's a little bit bigger. And the next thing you know, years have gone by and you haven't worked at it, and it's become this extremely compound and complex issue now. And it all started with giving a foothold to the enemy who despises your marriage and would love nothing more than to see it destroyed. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Work out the issue, make it a priority so they don't become a bigger issue. We're going to fight this thing out, and we're going to stay on it because we're not going to let our spiritual enemy destroy what God has joined together. This is all about seeking God, and we are aiming for win-win fighting. So when we're fighting, we don't react with the sinful flesh fighting back and below the belt. Instead, because we've been seeking God, we learn to respond by His Spirit, and there's a big difference. We don't react in the flesh in our own strength. We respond by the Spirit and power of God inside of us. We're not going to let our spiritual enemy get his foot in the door of our marriages anymore. We're going to start working harder than ever before to resolve the issues that threaten to tear us apart and drive a wedge between us. Do you really want to win in your marriage? That's the question we end this series with. Do you really want to win in your marriage? Be honest with that answer. Where you're at right now. And if you want to win in your marriage, then you can't keep doing what so many other couples in this world are doing that are passively sitting by while their marriages are going into the tank. You've got to make intentional daily choices to make your marriage a priority. You've got to be intentional with having the 3 types of fun that we talked about, and you've got to be focused on fighting for win-win outcomes when things get difficult. For those of us that have chosen to follow Christ, our marriages are supposed to look different than those of the rest of the world around us. They're supposed to show what can happen when a man and woman come together and allow God to be at the very center of their relationship. They're to show determination and resolve. They're to show compassion and grace and mercy. They're to show forgiveness and redemption. They are to show humility and service to one another. When we surrender ourselves to the plan that God has for our marriages, then and only then do we find ourselves winning in marriage. Let's pray. God, we have spent these past 3 Sundays focused in on the marriage relationship. And God, I know from a whole lot of conversations in the 8 years that I've been here that we have married couples here today that have just been on a roller coaster ride. I know we have couples here today that are in great places in their marriage, and I know that we have couples here today that are ready to throw up the white flag. And God, I want to first and foremost, I want to pray for those couples who right now don't even feel like they have the energy or desire to fight in their marriages. And God, I pray that you go beyond their own ability to desire it. And I pray that you give them a supernatural desire for their marriage to thrive. I pray for those that are here today that the enemy has convinced that their marriage cannot get any better than it is right now. So there's no point in trying. And I pray that we would realize that those are lies from the pit of hell itself. That you desire for our marriages to thrive. And just because we aren't feeling it right now, just because our circumstances are so difficult around us right now that we can't see beyond it, you are a big, big God, and you can show up and you can do amazing things in us and through us. And we are asking that, Lord, for our marriages today. God, we are praying for intentionality in our marriages, that we would not just simply go through the day-to-day routine of what needs to be done, what needs to be covered, who needs to go here, who needs to go there, but that we are intentional about making sure that our relationship with one another is of the highest value. And we see that because what we give our time to reflects what we give our value to. So God, I pray that you would help all of us to step up and be more intentional in our relationships, to be more intentional in having fun together, to be more intentional about setting some ground rules so that when things do get heated, that we still treat each other in a way that is honoring to you and that is working towards a win-win outcome. God, we recommit our marriages to you today. And God, I pray that if there are couples here who are struggling so much that they don't even know what the next step is, I pray that you would help them, give them the courage and strength to reach out to somebody else, whether it's somebody here on staff or a friend here or a Christian counselor, whatever that might look like, God. Give them the strength to reach out. Don't let stubbornness and pride keep you back from the marriage God wants for you. God, we love you. We want to be the reflection to the rest of the world that we talked about, that when people look at our marriages, they just think, what in the world is going on there? Something is so different from all the other marriages I know about. And it gives us an opportunity to share about you. It gives us an opportunity to share about the fact that we are broken, messed up people. And a marriage is bringing two broken, messed up people together, and they've got to learn the skills on how to make that work. They got to learn the approach that they need to have to one another so that they can sit down face to face, have these difficult conversations, but do them in a way that is honoring to you and that leads to a win-win resolution. So God, I just pray for each couple here. I pray for this coming week for a great conversation to start. I pray for intentionality and having more fun together, and I pray for intentionality in putting these fighting rules together as well so that we can honor you more and more in our marriages. God, we know marriage is not easy. You know marriage is not easy, but we want our marriages to reflect the love of Christ that he has for the church. That's what you tell us in Scripture that our marriage is supposed to be, is symbolic of the love that Christ has for the church. And we come up short so many times. So help us to take the next step today, Lord. Help us to be intentional and walk more closely with your word and your will for our lives and for our marriages. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.